So as I've discussed in a previous planning video, when you are planning a media essay, the first thing you want to do is highlight or underline the keywords in the question that they're giving you, because it reminds you to include those keywords in your answer and to specifically answer the question they are asking, rather than just rattling off stuff that you think they might want to know about that you have revised. So it's really important that you answer the question they are asking. In this case, explain how individual producers shape media products. So I would be underlining individual producers, I would be underlining shape, and I would be underlining I, Daniel Blake, as well. Remember, as specifically and as closely as you can link to that set product, the better. They do like you to have general industry knowledge of, in this case, more sort of independent filmmaking, but it is really important to link to that set product as soon as you physically can. So as you may have seen in a previous video, this question starts with explain. If we're going for higher marks, we want to try and do more than just explain, but actually come up with a big idea and think how far or to what extent. But hopefully you've remembered that you don't actually start with creating that argument or that big idea first. You want to start with listing some features. So let's have a little think about this. Explain how individual producers shape media products, refer to I, Daniel Blake. So the first thing is obviously, who's the individual producer? It's Ken Loach, of course. So my first feature that I'm going to plan for in section B is talking about Ken Loach. I mean, what a guy. You could talk about him all day, but be really specific about what you want to say about him. Essentially the fact here that he's always been an independent filmmaker. Hopefully you're aware of Cathy Come Home, which was released in 1966, his first kind of breakout film that was trying to draw attention to how easily it is to fall into the spiral of becoming homeless. And I would essentially maybe start this answer by talking about how he's always kind of been an independent filmmaker trying to champion a socialist cause. Socialism is generally crossed over with the Labour Party to an extent. The Labour Party would probably be seen as more centre nowadays, but when Jeremy Corbyn was in charge, he could be seen as more of a socialist, sort of almost like far left. So he has had interactions with the Labour Party as well. And you could talk about how his body of work has always been trying to push the socialist agenda. The second thing you might want to talk about in terms of how his production of his films shapes the films themselves is the fact that he is a strong believer in verisimilitude. I think I've actually just spelled it wrong, so I'm just going to switch those two round. That is a classic me error, and that's a hard word to spell, so if I've still spelled it wrong, I'm really sorry. Essentially, verisimilitude is the idea that you can't tell the difference between reality and fiction, essentially what you see in front of you in a film. So how does he achieve that through I, Daniel Blake specifically? Because remember, we want to get as specific as we can. You could talk about the casting. The fact that he chose lesser known actors who you wouldn't associate with any other specific films and roles. You might also want to talk about the fact that the film was co-produced. There were 4 different production companies involved, including 16 Films, which he co-owns with Rebecca O'Brien, who was the producer. But essentially thinking about the fact that he doesn't want big, large-scale film production companies necessarily to be involved in his work, and how that actually shapes the media product to be very niche. And in most cases, to kind of appeal to more of a niche audience. This isn't a mainstream film like Black Panther that lots of people are going to see. And finally, how individual producers shape media products. In the case of Ken Loach, all of his media products to an extent are deeply political. So this is where I'd bring in information about him fighting against the Conservative government's austerity measures, which was trying to cut public services, reducing funding for schools, for libraries, for the NHS, for why can't I think of the word? Social security, the money that you apply for when you are struggling. So essentially, all of these things that were being cut at the time, he is essentially trying to draw attention to that and to criticise the Conservative government, because at the heart of this story is a really hard-working man who has suffered a heart attack, who doesn't get taken seriously, doesn't receive the social security he needs, and ends up dying from the stress of trying to rectify these problems. So essentially, that is how he's shaping this media product, is he's thinking about the message that he's trying to send to the audience. That this cruelty, as Ken Loach put it in an interview, this conscious cruelty needs to come to an end. And he does that through the very moving story of the fictitious Dave Johns. So these are some of the things you can talk about in terms of his political input into the film. And if you want to be really specific again, we've talked about specifics before, can you link that to the character China and how he's on a 0 hours contract? Can you talk about the fact that Katie is from London, but she has to move all the way to Newcastle because there is a lack of social housing in London, because a lot of social housing is being sold off to private investors who are making so much money converting old council flats into private accommodation, essentially. So you could talk about gentrification, the film touches on period poverty, all these different kind of topical issues in and around political context, social context that you could talk about could be linked here, but I'm not going to have time when I'm planning to write down all of those specifics. So hopefully you'll remember, once you have underlined the keywords of the question, decided on your features, you then want to think, okay, how can I try and link in a theory? Is there some theorist that feels quite relevant here? If you're talking about film, it's normally under industry. So in terms of industry theorists, Curran and Seaton are really, really interesting to link to I, Daniel Blake, because they talk about this idea of independent film producers having the ability to be more creative and to give audiences more variety in the products that they offer. You might not have seen many films like I, Daniel Blake, but if you've seen Black Panther, although I'd argue it's a really good Marvel film, you know, there's arguments that some of these films are just being cloned again and again, but just with different characters and different plot lines. So essentially with Curran and Seaton, you could argue that because he is an individual producer, that gives him license to be creative, especially when it comes to the storyline. And it gives us variety as well. It's not very often that a film centres around a northern old man, for example. So that's one way that you could link to theory. Once you've decided how theory is going to interweave through your answer, you guessed it, the final thing you need to do is come up with your big idea. So we're going to try and go for higher marks. We're not just going to say explain, we're going to try and think how far or to what extent. So in this case, to what extent do individual producers shape media products? Well, let's go back to our framework here. I think Ken Loach has a massively positive effect on the film, and he has a large impact on the film. He is essentially part of all of it. Pre-production, production, post-production. He wants to make sure, as an auteur director, which means someone that has a specific style, it rhymes with water, but it's spelled like that. When you're an auteur film director, you essentially have your own style. You want to put your own stamp on it. It's your very personal work. So actually, we could argue that he has a large sort of role in shaping the film. because of his political stance, because of his status as an independent, a strongly independent, fiercely independent film director who actually has his own production company as well. So by the end of your planning, you should have some features that you've listed, a theorist that you want to link in, and you've come up with a big idea you can put into your introduction and then refer to throughout your essay, given the various different features you're going to talk about. Thanks for listening.